The term transits refers to the practice of comparing the positions of the planets at any given time to the positions at birth. Now, that's a very simple formula, comparing where the planets are now to where they were when you were born. That's transiting, or the moving planets, to natal, to the birth planets. But this simple technique, which is not very difficult to apply, which is incidentally why I call this course Advanced Astrology for Beginners, because what I'm really meaning is you don't really have to be very brilliant to do some advanced astrology, because transits is really where a lot of the juicy part of astrology lies. So this is the really important part of this course. It can't be overemphasized. That you will learn the most from getting into the practice of observing your transits. Transits are among the most important and reliable astrological methods of looking at life cycles. Accurate predictions about specific periods can be made using transits. Now, something to note about that statement, about the word predictions. You know, with astrology, one can often get a very good idea about what is likely to happen in a person's life in certain periods. But it's important to understand that astrology is not fundamentally about events, about external events. In astrology, we're looking at certain energetic dynamics, for want of better words. It's actually very hard to say precisely what we are looking at. You know, where we have a technique that can often accurately indicate to us what will be developing in a person's life psychologically and also to some degree externally, but we don't know all of the fine detail regarding how and why this works. You know, we don't understand the mechanism whereby it works. And the thing is that if you watch transits over a period of time, you'll see that to a very large extent, what we're looking at are really energies that manifest primarily psychologically and then tend to manifest somewhat secondarily as events. It is true that sometimes transits will describe things that just seem to happen. It'll seem to us like at times as if they are just events that just occur quite beyond our control. And yes, it certainly will appear that way. But when you see how often transits are actually describing very distinct psychological shifts without external events, it leads you to consider philosophically what's really going on here and where these energies are really occurring. And it could be argued that a lot of the external manifestations of transits are really often, especially when these external manifestations are quite dramatic and upsetting and outside of our control, it seems as if this is often due to the fact that we've been suppressing the psychological issues that the transit has raised in our lives. Because we find that not everybody has an equally hard time with certain difficult cycles. Some people manage to encounter and handle the issues that a transit will bring up in their life on this sort of psychological level where it first seeks to manifest. And if it can't find some sort of integration on that level, it then tends to manifest either in external events and sometimes also on a physical level as physical problems, health problems. Aspects formed between transiting and natal planets are calculated using a tight orb of about 1 degree for all aspects. This is a very important point. It's very simple, but a very key thing to take note of, that basically when we're looking at transits, we are looking at aspects from the transiting planets to the natal planets. We narrow the orb down to about 1 degree for all transiting aspects, whereas you'll recall that when we were looking at aspects in the birth chart, we had orbs for the different aspects. So we had for conjunctions and oppositions, because they're more powerful, we had fairly wide orb of about 9 degrees, and for the weaker aspects, they were far smaller orbs. Generally, when we're looking at transits, we're looking at near exact aspects. And in a way, this makes things easier, because you'll recall that whenever you have two planets at the same numbered degree of any two signs, they will be in exact aspect. You can see here in this example that Saturn is at 4 Cancer and Pluto there is at 4 Libra. That's just in the natal chart. That means that is describing that exact square between Saturn and Pluto. The point being, though, that whenever you have two planets like this at the same or very close to the same numbered degree, you definitely have some sort of aspect. It's only a question of which aspect it is. Because we use such a tight orb for transits, it makes them fairly easy to calculate. We just have to spot when two planets are at the same numbered degree. When we look at the ephemeris and we see that a planet is at 5 degrees of some other sign, if we have a planet in the natal chart at 5 degrees of any sign, those two will be in aspect. It's only then a matter of figuring out what that specific aspect is. So the fact that we don't have to deal with orbs in much detail with transits makes them easier to work with. And we find, and this is something you'll see for yourself, and it's certainly a very intriguing thing to witness, that transits manifest when they have arrived very close to within about 1 degree. It's interesting to see how they don't just sort of seem to occur somewhere around about that angle, like clockwork. When they reach at about 1 degree orb, they start to become noticeable. Sometimes a little bit soon is, this 1 degree orb is not an absolute rule, especially when it comes to conjunctions and oppositions. Transiting aspects by conjunction and opposition might well be effective within a wider range. In Vedic astrology terms, the moment planets are in the same or opposite signs, very widely or roughly the equivalent of conjunctions or oppositions, they are effective. They might become more powerful when they become closer to the exact orb, but they become effective the moment they're in the same or opposite signs. And it's useful to also look at whatever's going on through that wider, more general lens. Now, the natal houses in which the transiting planets are located are also considered. This is quite important, but it's a little bit tricky because there are different methods for dividing up the houses. Even within Western astrology, there are a few different methods. You'll see that the MC, or midheaven, in this case is 0 degrees of Leo, whereas the ascendant is 12 degrees Scorpio. You see, for certain technical astronomical reasons, this midheaven point, although in a sort of an abstract sense, one would it is the point directly 90 degrees from the ascendant. For certain technical astronomical reasons, it can deviate from that 90-degree point of the ascendant, sometimes quite a bit more than you have in this particular case, especially where people are born extreme north or south latitudes. So, in fact, when you get to the North Pole or very close to it, it can actually become a little ridiculous, where the lean between the MC and the ascendant could make for a huge distortion in the usual approximately even sizing of the different houses. Now, in Western astrology, there's another house system known as the equal house system, where every house, like the signs, is 30 degrees in width, and the ascending degree marks the beginning point. So if, like in this case, the ascending degree is 12 degrees Scorpio, the second house cusp will be 12 Sag, third house cusp will be 12 Capricorn, fourth house cusp will be 12 Aquarius, fifth house cusp will be 12 Pisces, and so on. Now, in some cases here, for example, there would be a whole 15-degree odd difference between where this default house system, the Placidus house system, which is the most common sort of default house system for Western charts. There's a whole 15-degree difference here between where the equal house and Placidus house systems would place the cusp of the fifth house. Now, you see here you have transiting Neptune shown on the outside. Neptune can take about 15 years to pass through one sign. This half a sign, 15-degree error there, could be a whole 7-year difference in when we consider Neptune to enter the fifth house. With other, Neptune is now one of the slower moving planets. Okay, so there we have a very radical difference. But for example, again, here you've got the fifth house cusp at the end of Aquarius in the Placidus house system, and the equal house system would place it at 12 degrees Pisces. That's about 15 degrees difference. The moon takes about 2.5 days to pass through one sign. And therefore, we here have a whole day error in depending on which way we measure the houses. Vedic astrology has yet another approach, which is a sort of a variation on the equal house approach. In the Vedic system, the whole sign that is rising is the first house. So that would be the first house would not begin at the ascendant. The ascendant, according to yet another Vedic house system, would be the middle of the first house. It just so happens that in this case that would work quite neatly for both of those Vedic house systems, but it doesn't always. So to cut a long story short, this last rule, while absolutely true in theory, is a little bit more tricky to deal with in practice. You see, if you were to ask no questions and you just had to take the Western charts that you're calculating wherever from astro.com or wherever using the default house system, by the way, I'm not saying you shouldn't give it a try, but just be aware that there are other ways of measuring the houses. So, like with the moon, with the transiting moon, you could be a day off, and that's like 50% of the 2-day period that the moon would be spending in whichever house. But even more serious is the outer planet transits, where, like in the case of Neptune, for example, as it's described here, Neptune is early in Pisces, and although it is in the 5th house already by the Placidus house system, it would only reach the 5th house in a few years from now, quite a few years from now, if we use the equal house system. Of course, things like this sometimes can only be resolved through your own research and application and comparison of the different results. My recommendation is that you learn the Vedic astrology techniques that I teach in a separate course, which specifically, if this course deals with aspects, that one deals with houses. And in a way, these two courses are, in a way, a complete presentation of the core tools that I use. I just present them separately because they come from different schools in a way. So it's the same concepts as we encounter with Western astrology, and if you don't want to go into the Vedic stuff, then we'll just realize that even these two different Western house systems can give you radically different results. Hence, I say, focus on aspects. All right. Now, you can see, by the way, the chart that we have here is one calculated at www.astro.com at Astrodienst. This is my chart, and when you go there to astro.com, you can have a natal chart drawn with the transiting planets, which will be shown in green on the outside of the wheel, and the positions will be listed there on the right next to the natal positions. This is not a bad way to go about it to begin with, as long as you bear in mind that 2 hours after you've had this chart drawn, the moon's degree has already moved one step further. 1 day later, the sun's degree and Mercury and Venus's degrees have probably moved a degree further along, and okay, the change won't be so instantly conspicuous with the outer planets, but you need to bear in mind that it can be a useful thing to do for a day or for half a day, because that's about as long as it remains, properly relevant. It's not any sort of long-term. There's no long-term relevance. Let me show you how this gets done. Remember, I suggested that you register as a user with astro.com, and once you do that, then you'll be able to calculate several charts and even save them. So I'm logged in at the moment, and then I would click on Free Horoscopes. I'm here at the Extended Chart Selection page. There, I've previously calculated my natal chart. So all the natal charts you've saved will be available here in this little drop-down link. Yes, the natal wheel we want. Then we've got the chart drawing style, which I tend to change to the AstroWiki format. Astro Wiki style, no Chiron or Chiron. Then we've got the house system. I leave that at default. We can ignore this stuff here for now. You see, it's got today's date, the 24th of November 2012 there. That's quite important, because if I want to create a chart, which is what I'm trying to do now, that shows the transiting as well as the natal positions, then I just need, well, it will use today's date, but you just might want to check that. Actually, we need to go back here to selecting the type of chart you want. Okay. The natal chart wheel is the basic one. Now then, it refers there to prognostic methods. And then the first one is transits. And then natal chart and transits. You select that. Natal chart and transits. Okay. That done, click here to show the chart. And here you can see there are the transiting positions on the right in green, the natal positions on the left. So you can also calculate them directly from here. You see the sun is at 2 degrees Sagittarius. So we can just scan. Remember now we're using a 1 degree orb, so we can just scan down here and see, okay, do we have anything at 1, 2, 3, anything within 1 degree orb? We see here that Jupiter is 2 degrees Aquarius. So there's something going on there. That is Sun transiting Sun. Sextile natal Jupiter. You will see here the sun is at 2 degrees and 6 minutes. It's only just arrived at 2 degrees. Whereas my Jupiter is 2 degrees 26 minutes. Now usually the minutes don't matter. It doesn't necessarily manifest its results when the degrees and minutes match. So anywhere from about 1 degree to going on 3 degrees, in this case we could expect a manifestation. Remember the sextile aspect specifically relates to communication, to neighbors, to friends, interaction. Basically, Jupiter being the sun in the context of transits just often acts as a general sort of trigger. So there's this idea of possibly connecting with a friend or friends, with some group. I don't yet have any plans, but it wouldn't surprise me if I get an unexpected call from a friend saying, how are you doing? Let's meet up, or something like that. This also indicates that I'd be in a kind of a philosophical mood. It's probably not a bad day for engaging in educational activities and things like that. So that's what's happening here. We can see, remember that the sun moves 1 degree per day. So tomorrow it'll be 3, the day after 4, and then it'll be quincunx my Saturn at 4 Cancer. So I'm not expecting late tomorrow or Monday when the sun hits 4 Sag and forms a quincunx to my Saturn to be a particularly pleasant day for that reason. Not only because Saturn is a difficult planet, because you'll recall quincunxes tend to also be awkward by themselves. So there might even be a little bit of a sense of not being very well, perhaps. at that time. On that same day, though, you see, because my Saturn is at 4 and my Pluto is at 4, see there in, you can see how thick this red line is here between Pluto and Saturn, and it's because of this very exact square between them in my natal chart. It means that these two planets are always triggered for me together by all these 30-degree multiple aspects. So I will also have Sun sextile Pluto around Monday. Of course, the most difficult triggers for me will be when planets are at 4 of cardinal signs. 4 Aries, 4 Cancer, 4 Libra, 4 Capricorn. And you'll see that Mars at the moment, you see Mars is now at 6. No, sorry, 5. You see transiting Mars is at 5 Capricorn. So transiting Mars has just passed an opposition to my Saturn and a square to my Pluto. You see, when transiting Mars was at 4 of Capricorn, which was basically the last 2 days or so, it would have opposed my Saturn and squared my Pluto, and that, by anybody's standards, is not much fun. Now, you'll see Mercury is at 18 Scorpio, and it's retrograde. It was at 19. Now, this is not something you would have picked up, so don't worry. But just to give you a little example of something that might be more useful to you in future, Mercury at this point forms a semi-square, 45-degree angle to Pluto, and a sesquiquadrate, a 135 to Saturn. We did talk about them much earlier. So I've also had Mercury, Saturn, Pluto, Mars, Saturn, Pluto, and then you see transiting Saturn here is at 5 degrees Scorpio, right? You see there's my Mars, 6 Taurus. See, so that Saturn is about to trigger my Mercury-Mars opposition. Now, on Thursday, 2 days ago, I went to do my motorcycle driving test, which, well, it could have been predicted. I failed. And you know, of course, when the appointment was made for me several weeks ago, you know, when you get given your appointment, well, I suppose you can whip out your transit page and check the date, but well, I didn't have it with me at that moment, and I just accepted what they had dished out. And you know, sometimes you have to let life just happen. But my point here being is that I transiting Mars opposing natal Saturn and transiting Saturn opposing natal Mars. Okay, that's the fact that I managed to stay on the bike is evidence of the fact that one shouldn't be too fatalistic about these transits, because you know those are classic danger transits, actually, literally. Yes, it is true that I had far more than usual near incidents on the road with people, you know, suddenly coming out of nowhere and just cutting in front of me, which on a motorcycle, of course, is always disconcerting. So, you know, I'm just trying to give you a bit of an example of the actual real life stuff that can happen. There have been other things too for me at this time, you know, like the Saturn Mercury, like some very sort of grave discussions with girlfriend about various issues. Remember that the opposition aspect, you see there's 2 here. Transiting Saturn to natal Mars and transiting Mars to natal Saturn. Remember the opposition aspect is a 7th house aspect, 7-7. And the 7th house is about relationships. You see, bit of a stressful time in that respect. Okay, so to be totally honest with you, I am not currently having the most cheery sort of time looking at my transits. I see here that, you might want to note this, that this was calculated for UT, Universal Time 000, meaning midnight GMT. So this was for 2 a.m. And I noticed this because I see the moon here is at 11 degrees Aries, the transiting moon, and I know it's past that already now. That's where it was 2 a.m. this morning. So you could probably fill in a more specific time. Remember, you've got to watch this moon's degree. Moon moves 1 degree in 2 hours. This is very, very important to remember, because with transits that can help you to sometimes hone in on a very particular time of a very specific time of a specific day, when a whole lot of accumulating energies from other transits can be brought into sharp focus if the moon plugs into those configurations. Now, let me introduce you here to another little concept. Here we have the ephemeris for 2012. Let's go to November, which is where we are now. Remember, you can download these PDFs at astro.com for free. There we are today, 24th of November. You see, Venus in the beginning of the month, it was in Libra, right? But then here, it enters Scorpio the last 2 days. It is now in the beginning of Scorpio. Saturn, slower moving planet, been in Scorpio since the beginning of the month. It is now at 5. It is about to hit 6 degrees of Scorpio. You see, Venus, the faster moving planet, is going to catch up. And right about here, you see, there we have Venus at 6 Scorpio and Saturn at 6 Scorpio. We can see this in this Astro.com chart. There you can see it there. You can see how Venus is close to Saturn. Venus is busy catching up to Saturn. And Saturn is sitting there on my Mercury and opposing my Mars. And Venus in a few days will join Saturn. That's going to be, I think, some sort of climax, for better or worse, in my ongoing relationship negotiations. You know, it's slightly personal, I suppose, but, well, these things are about real personal experience. But something I want to underline is that, never mind my chart, this isn't a global little event that's occurring here. You know, Venus is approaching a conjunction to Saturn. Somebody born during the next few days would have a Venus-Saturn conjunction in their birth charts. And that Venus-Saturn conjunction in their birth charts would tend to represent a type of difficulty in relationships, a sense of maybe feeling inferior or inadequate or unattractive or something like that, perhaps getting involved in relationships where one isn't really respected, etc., etc. A whole lot of different possible themes, and you could refer to my book for some of the typical general themes associated with Venus-Saturn combinations. So quite apart from how this might plug into anybody's chart, your chart, somebody else's chart, my chart, there's a global Venus-Saturn mood that is permeating the world during the next few days. So it could be argued that the chances of there being relationship breakups or very significant structuring, which is a Saturn word, of relationship is indicated here. In some cases that could even mean a solidification of relationship, like a clarification of the structure within which a relationship will work. Something like that, for example. Now, just to give you a little hint, in Vedic astrology, Venus and Saturn would be in the sign Libra, not in Scorpio. And it's another story for another time why that is the case. But these two planets are both quite strong and happy in the sign Libra. So this Venus-Saturn conjunction arguably has more potential for some sort of constructive manifestation than at other times, because of the fact that both these planets will be in good signs, which means that they can express their energies in a slightly more elevated way. But you see, we don't have to bring that consideration or weave that consideration into this observation that Venus and Saturn are in a conjunction, because it doesn't completely negate the general description that I've given about it being a time when relationships may end, a time when there's certain constriction on relationships, and so on and so on. So can you see that when we're looking at transits, we are also often looking at things that are happening on a global level. We can often catch glimpses of certain energetic shifts on a global level that may or may not manifest as dramatic events on the world stage, but it could, well, sometimes it will, by the way, but it could be something that we notice in our environment, for example, under a Venus-Saturn conjunction like this, through lots of people having relationship challenges and so on. You see there, Mars and Pluto are also approaching each other. And remember, Mars is the slow-moving planet, is here at an earlier degree. So that tells us that unless Mars was retrograde, Mars is actually busy moving towards Pluto. Again, we can check this in the ephemeris. There's Mars in Sagittarius, entered Capricorn on the 18th. There's Pluto, been in Capricorn, 7 degrees Capricorn most of the month, 8 degrees Capricorn at the end of the month. Now we see Mars in Capricorn since the 18th. It's now at 5, and there it hits 8. So around about here, around about 27, 28 November, Mars will be conjunct Pluto. By the way, it's not only conjunctions that are valid, you know, they're just very easy to see on that wheel, incidentally. And they are more powerful than many other types of aspects. But this is a very aggressive energy that's occurring here, 27th, 28th, next week, just before the middle of the week or around the middle of the week. There could be some globally significant military incident or or aggressive crimes, violent crimes, something like, along those lines. Certainly, if you have a planet at 8 degrees of cardinal signs, 7, 8, 9 degrees of cardinal signs, then Mars and Pluto will be together activating that part of your chart. Let's just say, for example, you have Moon. Let's say you had Moon in Capricorn in your birth chart at 8 degrees Capricorn. Well, you would already be aware that you're in a period with a lot of emotional, like a high voltage emotional phase, because Pluto is right now sitting exactly on that Moon. But when you have a faster moving planet like Mars plugging into that for a day or two, that's when you have a short-term spike, short-term peak in that longer-term process. So this is the kind of thing you want to look out for, is when you've got a longer-term transit occurring where a faster-moving planet arrives and joins that picture, and those will be the dramatic events. Those will be the times when the hovering issue, the sort of looming issue, becomes an acute crisis, where all the pent-up or looming energy precipitates into some dramatic external manifestation.